The moment CEO Richard Langford told the board his son could finish the project in half the time, I felt the words land on me like a verdict. He kept his tone casual, almost helpful. But every person at that table knew exactly whom he was aiming at. I had spent 10 years building the operations behind that project. And in one sentence, he made me sound like a delay, a burden, a mistake he had tolerated for too long. I sat 2 seats down from him, my hands folded over the folder that held the letter I never wanted to use. He leaned back, fingers interlaced, a thin smile forming as the board murmured in approval. "Connor understands speed," Richard added. "Maren's approach is methodical." The pause before that last word stung. He wanted them to hear it as slow, obsolete, replaceable. Connor Langford, sitting across from me, lifted his chin slightly as if the crown had already been placed on his head. When his eyes met mine, he gave the smallest nod, the kind people give when they believe they have already won. I opened the folder. The paper inside trembled, not because I doubted myself, but because my anger was fighting to stay under my skin. When I raised the resignation letter, Richard's smile sharpened. "There it is," he said softly, before I could speak. The founder Elias Donovan cut through the room with a voice so even it silenced everyone. "Give the project to your son." Richard straightened, satisfied. Then Elias turned his head toward me. "Maren, 10 minutes from now, bring me that letter." Nothing in his expression revealed whether this was execution or reprieve. The board shifted uncomfortably, waiting for the next blow, but none came. The meeting dissolved around us, chairs scraping back, papers gathered in haste. Everyone pretending this was a normal transition and not a public gutting. I stood, clutching the letter, my pulse beating everywhere at once. Richard watched me leave with the certainty of a man who believed he had erased a problem. He did not know I had walked out with the one thing he could never control, the truth that would unravel everything he built. I took a breath in the hallway and started toward Elias's office, the letter warm in my hand and my future sharper than it had been in years. When I left the boardroom, the hallway felt too narrow, too bright. I kept moving, the resignation letter folded tight in my hand, and somewhere between one breath and the next, the last 10 years rose up behind me like a tide I had tried too long to outrun. I had arrived in Seattle with a single suitcase and a severance check from a Midwest startup that collapsed under leadership twice as reckless as Richard Langford. Apex had felt like a clean start. No promises, no guarantees, just a place where hard work might finally matter. In those early years, no one paid much attention to me. I was the quiet one in operations who fixed the workflows no one else wanted to touch. When a system broke, I repaired it. When a deadline collapsed, I held it together. I did not need recognition then, I only needed stability. My father's medical bills were rising, and every invoice reminded me why losing another job was not an option. During the pandemic, the company nearly folded under the weight of failing contracts. I worked 14-hour days patching 2 major accounts that should have died on the spot. When they survived, people congratulated Richard for timing the recovery perfectly. Someone told me, "You got lucky." Maren. Everything aligned. I remember staring at him, wondering how anyone could mistake exhaustion for luck. The small things began after that. A team meeting where someone said, "We should let the louder voices lead." A strategy session where Richard introduced a new hire and joked, "We could use more energy and fewer spreadsheets." A leadership dinner I was somehow not invited to until the next morning, when it no longer mattered. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself everyone was tired. Everyone was stressed. Everyone said careless things. But walking through that hallway now, past people who would not meet my eyes, I understood the truth I had been too loyal to see. I had not faded into the background. I had been pushed there, piece by piece, until the day they decided I was no longer meant to be visible at all. I reached Elias Donovan's door and tightened my grip on the letter, unsure of what waited on the other side. Connor Langford arrived on a Monday morning with a smile that seemed practiced in front of a mirror. Richard stood beside him in the operations bullpen and announced, "Everyone, this is the fresh energy we have been waiting for." His voice carried the kind of pride that usually belongs to accomplishments, not inheritances. Connor stepped toward me first. "You must be Maren," he said, shaking my hand lightly, as if afraid real pressure might break something. "My father says your workflows are dependable." Dependable, I repeated. He nodded, a polite half-smile forming. I am excited to modernize a few things. The first meeting he attended was a status review I had prepared overnight. Before I could finish presenting, he leaned forward. If we shift the staging sequence, he said, we can cut 3 days off delivery. He said it smoothly, confidently, like he had studied the system for years instead of minutes. I kept my voice steady. That step guards against client data loss. Removing it is risky. Richard looked at Connor. Still worth exploring. Good instincts. My slides were still on the screen, but the board members now watched him. Later that week, I found one of my reports edited with entire sections missing. My name had been removed from the header. When I asked the analyst who uploaded it, she hesitated before answering. Connor said you prefer to stay behind the scenes, she whispered. He said you are steady but outdated. The word struck harder than I expected. I closed the file slowly, feeling something inside me shift. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. 2 days later, I passed by a conference room where Richard and Connor stood alone. Richard's voice was low, strained. Do not embarrass me again. Do you understand? Connor's reply was tight, barely audible. I will fix it. I promise. He looked pale when he stepped out and nearly collided with me. Maren, he said quickly. About the timelines, we can be faster if we push boundaries. What boundaries? I asked. The ones slowing us down. His jaw flexed. Whatever confidence he displayed in meetings cracked the moment his father was not watching. Piece by piece, he was rewriting my work into his narrative, piece by piece. I felt myself being written out. The shift did not happen overnight. It happened in sentences small, deliberate, deceptively harmless. In a leadership meeting, Richard tapped the screen displaying my workflows. These stages served us years ago, he said, glancing toward the board. But they slow us down now. We need modernization, a director asked. What kind of modernization? Richard folded his arms. New leadership energy. Less dependence on old bottlenecks. No one said my name. They did not need to. Every person in that room turned slightly toward me, the way people look at a light that is starting to flicker. After the meeting, I approached the shared drive to finalize a quarterly report I had submitted 2 days earlier. When I opened it, the numbers were different, dangerously different. Entire risk categories reduced. Delivery metrics inflated, and my name was still at the bottom. I scanned each line twice, then a third time. If those numbers reached the board, the gaps would point directly to me. I closed the file with a shaking breath. In the hallway, Miguel, one of my longest-standing analysts, stopped short when he saw my face. What happened? Someone altered my report. He lowered his voice. Maren. Richard told the senior team to expect changes in operations leadership soon. His expression tightened. He said the board is tired of slow processes. Slow, I repeated quietly. He swallowed. I should not have said anything. Just watch yourself. I nodded and walked back to my desk. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but I could not bring myself to type. I heard Richard's voice echoing from earlier meetings, dead weight, bottleneck, resistance to innovation. Each phrase peeled another layer off the truth until I barely recognized the work I had built. If I stayed quiet, the altered numbers would define me. If I defended myself, I would be cast as combative, emotional, difficult. I closed the laptop, feeling the dread settle deeper in my chest. Whatever was happening inside Apex was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a story being rewritten, line by line. And I was nowhere on the page except the part marked for removal. Elias Donovan's door was half open when I reached it. I hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. He looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. Close the door, Maren, he said. I obeyed, holding the resignation letter at my side, like something fragile I was afraid to drop. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. When I did, he nodded once. Now tell me, why did you bring that letter to the boardroom? I stared at him. Because Richard has been shaping the narrative for months. Because Connor keeps stripping critical steps from my workflows, without knowing what those steps protect. And because if I stayed silent today, I would become the excuse they needed when the project collapsed. Elias tapped a pen against his notepad. Which steps did he remove? The dependency review. I said. The verification cycle. The federal compliance checkpoints. If a client questions any of it, we will be exposed. And the documentation trail will point back to me. He let the silence stretch before speaking again. I suspected manipulation, but I needed confirmation. Manipulation. My voice tightened. Yes, he said. Numbers that should not match. Files altered at odd hours. Progress logs with gaps. He leaned back slightly. If I asked for an internal review, Richard would bury anything that implicated his son. I needed a source outside his reach. I frowned. A source. Elias slid a small card across the desk. Stratton Data Partners. I want you to work with them for a short-term assessment. I looked down at the card, then back up. You want me out of Apex. I want you out of Richard's range, he replied. If you stay here, he will rewrite every file until the board believes the failures are yours. At Stratton, the truth will stay intact. The room felt suddenly smaller. You were planning this. I was preparing for it, he corrected. Now I need you to prepare, too. I folded the card between my fingers, the weight of it sharp and unexpected. Whatever Richard was hiding, Elias believed I was the only person who could uncover it without being erased in the process. Stratton Data Partners gave me a temporary badge and a stack of folders taller than my forearm. Marta Figueroa, the director overseeing my review, walked me to a small conference room. These are Apex's submissions for the last 6 months, she said. Elias said you would know what to look for. I opened the first folder. Within seconds, my stomach tightened. This draft, I said quietly, tapping a page, is mine. Marta leaned closer. Yours, I wrote this in early spring, but the timestamp says it was created 2 weeks ago. And the author tag lists Connor Langford. Her eyebrows lifted. Keep going. I flipped through the pages, each one louder than the last. Workflow diagrams missing entire verification cycles. Compliance checkpoints erased. Safeguards reduced to footnotes. The signature fields at the bottom showed my name, but the initials were forged in a handwriting meant to resemble mine. Someone wanted this to look approved, I said. Marta nodded slowly. We noticed inconsistencies but needed confirmation. I moved to the next file, budget allocations. This line item came from operations, I said, but it was rerouted to Connor's pilot. Unauthorized, Marta asked. Completely. She left the room briefly and returned with Marcos Navarro from compliance. He placed another file in front of me. We pulled access logs, Marcos said. Look at the highlighted entries. The entries were from late nights, long after I had logged out. The username was Richard's. The reason logged for access audit preparation. He told the system he was reviewing your archived folders, Marcos said. But the files he retrieved matched the altered versions sent to the board. I stared at the pages, each alteration threading into the next like a net tightening around the truth. They had not just edited my work, they had built a story where every missing checkpoint and every inflated metric would fall back on me. I closed the folder, the paper warm under my hands. Whatever they had sent to the board was only the surface. The real danger, the part still hidden, was deeper than any document in front of me. I was at Stratton the next morning when Miguel's name lit up my phone. He did not wait for me to answer before speaking. They called an emergency meeting, he whispered. Elias walked in with the audit packet. I stepped into an empty office and closed the door. Tell me what is happening. He started with the access logs, Miguel said. Richard's username appears on every altered file. Elias laid out the timestamps, the false authorization notes, everything. In the background, I heard raised voices, then Connor's. What did he say? I asked. He is trying to explain why he deleted the verification cycles. He claimed they were optional. I pressed my hand to my forehead. They are tied to federal compliance. Exactly, Miguel said. When Elias pointed that out, Connor froze. One of the board members said, You clearly do not understand the system you claim to improve. There was another burst of noise, chairs scraping, someone pounding the table. Now Elena Ruiz is speaking, Miguel murmured. She is furious. She just said, You misled us. Richard. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Miguel exhaled sharply. It is over. Elias recommended suspension pending a full investigation. The board agreed. And Connor stripped of all authority, effective immediately. I leaned against the wall, the air leaving my lungs in a slow, steady stream. Maren, Miguel added softly. They issued a statement before adjourning. Every board member agreed on it. I waited. They said, "We owe Maren Holt an apology." All of them. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle without rushing to feel anything. The damage Richard tried to pin on me had cracked open in his own hands, and the truth finally was louder than his excuses. I thanked Miguel quietly and ended the call. The silence around me suddenly different than it had ever been. Marta slid the final page of the consulting contract toward me. "This is long-term," she said. "You will lead operational architecture across our intercompany projects. Full autonomy." My hand hovered over the line where my signature belonged. Leaving Apex had felt like a free fall. Signing this felt like landing somewhere solid for the first time in years. I wrote my name slowly, the ink settling into the paper with a certainty my chest had not yet caught up to. When I stepped out of the conference room, my phone buzzed. Miguel's voice came through, strained but determined. "It is official," he said. "Richard's suspension is now termination. The board released the notice an hour ago." I leaned against the wall. "And Connor gone?" He replied. "They said the altered compliance files alone were enough to remove him. Apex is restructuring everything: policy reviews, leadership audits, the whole system." There was a pause before he added, "People are talking, Maren. They are saying your resignation did not break the company. The lies about you nearly did." I let out a breath I had been holding since the day I first printed my resignation letter. "Thank you for telling me. You should also know," Miguel continued. "Stratton's reputation shot up after the audit. Other firms already know you were the one who caught everything." I closed my eyes. "I never thought anyone outside Apex would care." "They care now," he said. "You are not erased. You are the person they trust to keep systems alive." We hung up, and I stood in the hallway for a long moment, my hand resting on the signed contract inside my bag. The weight of leaving Apex no longer felt like loss. It felt like space-wide, unclaimed, and finally mine to step into. 6 months passed in a rhythm I had never known at Apex. At Stratton, my work did not vanish into someone else's presentation. The architecture I built for one client became the model for 5 more, then 10. Marta would stop by my office with a grin and say, "They want the Holt framework. They asked for it by name." One afternoon, she stepped in with a folder she held a little differently, careful, almost amused. "Apex reached out," she said. I looked up. "For what? A partnership proposal?" She replied. "They want Stratton to handle their new compliance rebuild." She paused, letting the moment settle. "They also asked a very specific question." I waited. "They want to know if Miss Holt will be leading the integration." The words struck with a strange mix of heat and calm. The company that tried to erase me now needed the structure I had created, one they could not alter, falsify, or claim as their own. "Do you want it?" Marta asked. "I will lead it," I said. "On Stratton's terms." She smiled, then let us schedule the meeting. When the day arrived, I walked into the conference room first. The Apex delegation filed in a moment later, new faces, nervous energy, and one familiar director who froze when he saw me at the head of the table. He cleared his throat. "Miss Holt, we appreciate you agreeing to this." I opened the folder in front of me. "Stratton drives the integration. You follow our architecture. The timeline and checkpoints are non-negotiable." They nodded quickly, too quickly. No one interrupted. No one tried to speak over me. Every directive I gave was met with agreement, not resistance. By the end of the hour, Apex was officially a Stratton client. I shook their hands, each one firm and steady, and felt no triumph, no bitterness, only clarity. For the first time in my career, I was not fighting to keep a place someone else could take away. I was building a life they could never touch. My new office at Stratton overlooked the sound, the water shifting in quiet patterns below. I had never asked for a view, but Marta insisted. "You deserve to see where you are going," she said, when she handed me the keys. For the first time in a long while, I believed her. I was reviewing the final page of a cross-company initiative when Elias knocked lightly on the doorframe. "You are expanding faster than any consultant we have brought in," he said. "Clients trust you immediately." "I spent a long time being told I needed to earn a seat," I replied. "It feels different to build one instead." He sat across from me. "I saw the internal announcement Apex released last week. They admitted the compliance failures began the day your workflows were altered." I kept my eyes on the document in my hands. Their downfall was never mine to orchestrate. No, he agreed. Richard and Connor did that themselves. The truth settled between us without bitterness. Their shortcuts, their edits, their arrogance, they had all stacked on top of one another until the weight collapsed under them. I had not pushed. I had simply stepped out of the way. Elias rose. You have another proposal coming this afternoon. A major firm. They requested you specifically. After he left, I signed the new initiative and closed the folder gently. I thought of the boardroom where Richard smirked as if my letter were his victory. I thought of Connor's hurried explanations, the panic in his voice when the audit exposed everything he built on falsified ground. None of it felt triumphant now, just clear, unmistakable. I had never needed to reclaim my old seat. I had outgrown it long before they pushed me out. The industry asked for me by name now, and for once, the path ahead felt entirely my own.